The next part of 12.1 is word problems. So far, the only shape that we have been using for trigonometry is a right triangle. So every time you have a word problem, if they don't give you a picture, start by drawing a right triangle. Even before you read the problem, you should draw a right triangle, and then as you read the problem, fill in information as you learn it. Don't forget your right angle. So for this one, it says you are measuring the height of a flagpole. So I'm going to make this into a flagpole. There's my flag. You stand 20 feet from the base. So if I'm over here, it said I'm 20 feet from the base or the bottom of my flagpole. You measure the angle of elevation, which angle of elevation means from a horizontal line going up. So it doesn't mean it's at the top, it means it's starting from horizontal going up. So my angle of elevation would be over by me, where I'm standing. So you measure the angle of elevation from a point on the ground to the top of the pole to be 65 degrees. Estimate the height of the pole to the nearest foot. So I need to find my height. Okay, when you have a problem like this, if you know two pieces of information, an angle and a side, you can use Trig or SOHCAHTOA to help you find the missing information you're looking for. When you do this, you're going to want to use the angle they give you, so 65. X would be our opposite side, and then 20 would be our adjacent. Because we are working with the opposite and the adjacent side, that shows me I'm going to be using tangent. So when I write my equation, it's going to be tangent of the angle 65. So whatever angle you use to label the opposite and the adjacent with will be equal to my opposite side x over my adjacent side 20. Once I have the equation, then we're going to solve. So our goal is to get x by itself. Right now we have x divided by 20, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 20. When you do that, you are going to put that number in front of any of your trig functions that you have. So it's going to be 20 tangent of 65 equals x. Then you can type it into your calculator. So 20 tan of 65, and that would look like 20 tangent 65. And if you are getting a new calculator for this, or you haven't checked if it's in degrees, you want to make sure you hit mode and then select degrees there. So then once you type it in, that will be our answer. So if you didn't get 42.89 something, you're probably in the wrong mode, so you should try it again and type it into your calculator. So 42.89. For word problems, you're usually going to be rounding. So we know it's about 42.8, and they asked to round to the nearest foot. So 42.8 is going to be closer to 43. So it's going to be about 43 feet for the height of the flagpole. And that's my answer. Okay, so then my next one, just like before, the only triangles we are going to be using in this class are right triangles. So I'm going to start my picture with a right triangle, and then I'm going to read through the problem. So this one, a cable to a radio tower. So here's my radio tower. Makes an angle of 54 degrees with the ground. So if this is the ground, and that's the tower, that means the only side left to have the cable is the hypotenuse. And it made an angle with the ground that's 54 degrees. If the cable is 240 feet, so my cable is the hypotenuse, I'm going to label that 240. How far above the ground does it meet the tower? So that's going to be the height of this triangle. And they, again, want us to round to the nearest foot. So if I'm using this angle, 54 degrees, the x is my opposite side, and 240, the cable, is my hypotenuse. So if I look from SOHCAHTOA, the one that uses opposite and hypotenuse is sine. So that tells me I'm going to start with the sine of my angle, 54 degrees, equals the opposite side x over the hypotenuse, 240. Once I have my equation, then I'm going to solve. So I want x by itself. Right now it's being divided by 240, so I'm going to multiply by 240. So that would give me 240 times the sine of 54. And then you can type it into your calculator. So remember, you should practice typing these into your calculator so you for sure know how to do it for a quiz or test. Alright, so if I pull this up, make sure again it's in degrees. Oops. So 240 times the sine of 54. And you should get about 194. So that's what it should look like on your calculator. So about 194.1. And it did say again, round to the nearest foot. So 194 feet would be my answer. Okay, so once you get the picture labeled correctly, usually solving is not that difficult for these, just like in geometry. So then our last word problem example tells us, oh, before I read it, I am going to draw my triangle. Okay, so an airplane flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet is headed toward an airport. So this point over here, this can be my airport. And then up here, this is going to be the airplane. And it said it was at an altitude. So altitude means height, and it's going straight up and down. So anytime you're measuring altitude, it should never be the hypotenuse. And that is 30,000 feet. Okay, to guide the airplane to a safe landing, the airport's landing system sends radar signals from the runway to the airplane at a 10-degree angle of elevation. So again, angle of elevation is from a horizontal line going up. So that means this angle down here is 10 degrees. How far is the airplane away from the airport along the ground? So make sure you are reading the whole problem, because the ground again would be like flat. It would be the bottom of this triangle. So that means they're looking for X on the bottom. A common mistake for this problem is people think that they're talking about the hypotenuse, but because they specified along the ground, it needs to be that bottom side of the triangle. So once we know that, our angle is 10 degrees, the side opposite of that is 30,000, and then the adjacent would be X. So if we have opposite and adjacent, if we look at SOHCAHTOA, opposite and adjacent is tangent. And when we set that up, it would be tangent of 10 degrees equals our opposite side, 30,000, over X. Okay, now for this one, X is not on the top of our fraction. And these are the problems where people tend to make some algebra mistakes. If you want, you can cross multiply. So we would just take 30,000 times 1. And then X times the tangent of 10. And just like with when we have a number times that, we put it in the front. So we would have X tangent of 10. Another way you could have done it is you could have just multiplied both sides by X. So if we were to do times X and then times X, we would get the same result at this point, because the X's over on the right would just cancel and we would have 30,000 by itself. So those are the two different ways I usually show people how to start this problem. And then another thing that's important to remember, the tangent of 10, that is just one term or one value. They are stuck together. You cannot just divide by 10 and then divide by tangent. They go together. So if I want X by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by the tangent of 10 and tangent of 10. So then on the right side, these two would cancel out, and then I have X by itself, and then we are able to type this into our calculator. So 30,000 divided by the tangent of 10. Again, make sure your calculator is in degrees, and also make sure you are putting the correct number of zeros behind your 3 for 30,000. So 30,000 divided by the tangent of 10 degrees. Oops. And that gives us 170,138.45. Sorry. So we would have 170, 138.45. And this one did not specify where to round, so you can choose to round to 1 or 2 decimal points when you are rounding those. And don't forget your label.